is going to be a little bit different today. As you see, I have three of my brothers here in, we'll call it Evolved Masculine headquarters, even though we're somewhere separate today. This is Destin Garrick, and what we're exploring today is really just explore like how each of us have been through our own transformational journeys, our own process of hitting some form of crisis in our life, something where how our lives were going, just something needed to shift or change. Maybe it was a massive personal crisis. Maybe there was just the desire, that yearning for more. There must be more to life than this. There must be more possible for me to do than this. Just that voice started to get louder than everything else, and something had to give. Each man here has their own story. Many of you have heard mine before. I've spoken in countless interviews, and so my focus is primarily on these men. Each of these men, who we're going to introduce to you in a moment, has been engaged with our work here at the Evolved Masculine in a variety of ways, some as long as 7 years. And we're going to explore like who this man was before, what it is that drove him to take on this level of identity recreation and complete transformation of self so intently, with such a depth of commitment, and what that journey was like for him, as well as where he's at now. And for the men particularly who are listening, who feel a sense of resonance, a sense of like, I need something like that in my life now. Also some words of wisdom about, from men who have been through that process, or like how you might be able to do the same, what might support you in that process. So with that, I want to start at my far end here with Sir Michael Author.
Thanks, Dustin. My name is Michael Author, and I have adopted the title of Transformational Sorcerer. My last name, Author, was something that I adopted.
Closer.
Oh, my last name was something that I adopted as a result of my engagement with my own transformational process. That's me.
Yeah. Just remember, everybody, stay close. Eat the mic. Those who are watching and listening, if you're here live, please let us know if there are any audio-related issues. We'll get much more into that. Particularly, I want to hear more about why Michael Author, as well as what the fuck is a transformational sorcerer. But we'll bookmark that for now and bring it to Bodhi.
Okay. Yeah, my name's Bodhi. That is a new name for me within the last year. I do not have a particular title, but I'm definitely curious about that. I think my walk with Destin has been a little less than a year, but I've been
pretty full on.
Yeah, totally full on and intense. But I've definitely been on this path for, I would say, I've been seeking for probably 10 years. And in the last year, it's been huge changes, huge growth. I'm to the point where people don't recognize me.
I barely do.
I don't recognize you.
Just if you could bottom line it in one or two sentences, when you say that you've been seeking for 10 years, what have you been seeking?
10 years ago, I just knew that life didn't have to be the way that it was. And so the seeking was just for something that felt right. The last couple of years, I've just been seeking the idea of just being a better version of myself every day is a great way to say that.
Okay, we'll start there. A little more than a sentence too, but we'll dig in deeper. And João.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Destin, for having me here on your podcast. My name is João. I'm Brazilian. I've been with Destin for about 3 years now. And I've always been into personal growth, personal development, but things really sped up after I met Destin and I started doing the Evolved Masculine work. And yeah, I've always knew that my growth had something to do with masculinity, with sexuality, and that's what I found when I met Destin. So yeah, this has been my journey so far. There's a lot to unpack there. I guess it's just a quick introduction. By the way, I just want to acknowledge too that this is the first time I'm in bed with 4 men, and it feels great.
Can I say the same? I'm not sure.
I can't.
Maybe with just 3 other men, but I don't know. So again, I want this to be as conversational as possible. We don't necessarily have to go, okay, you, no, you, then you, but so popcorn style. Whenever you feel really inspired, speak up, butt in, what have you. But I guess I'll point this to Michael, you first, just because you have been intentionally on this path and engaged with the evolved masculine work for the longest here. It's about 7 years, if I recall correctly. I've asked you this many times in different formats before, but hopefully something deeper can come through. But can you share a little bit about your story, and particularly like what drove it?
Sure. The short answer is a complete life meltdown. I think everybody experiences that at some point in time. But to be more specific and to give a longer answer, I guess I would call myself an educator, a teacher, an academic, a writer, and somebody who was heavily invested in the world of education. It was everything that I knew, and my life had felt largely constricted by that, shaped by that, and there was a sense that I knew around approaching like age 26, 27, 28, like I needed more from life, but I didn't know where to find it. And I don't know if any of you have been through this, but when you have that feeling of like, I need something more, something needs to give, you will create that something, right? And I certainly did create that something.
How? How did you create that something? Because your way of creating that something wasn't exactly all like, yay, everything's wonderful.
No, it wasn't. I fell very deeply in love with and dated an amazing woman who I still love very much, who is or was a heroin addict. And I had no idea what that meant. In recovery. And she was in recovery, right? And very much...
wait, you don't mean that you met her while you were both in recovery?
No, personally, I have not been a heroin addict. I meant she was in recovery.
Got it.
In recovery. And I was married, and it was somebody who was not my wife, right? So add 2 things onto there: polyamory, and
so when you say polyamory, you mean that this was with the awareness of your wife. You weren't sneaking around behind your wife's
correct.
back.
Yeah, it was consensual, and it was something that was so far outside of my reality at the time that I had no context with which to interpret the experience. I was like, oh, wow, that sounds like an amazing journey. You seem like a great person. Let's like really intertwine my life with yours. And ended up and actually ended up getting her pregnant, which was its own... that I would say that was probably the precipitating event for everything that I had built in my life coming crashing down.
So I want to pause you there for a moment, because these are the types of stories that have the potential to just completely ruin a person's life. You're in a marriage. You open up the marriage to explore this consensual polyamory, open to other lovers' experience, and who do you fall in love with but a recovering heroin addict who you then impregnate? And from what I recall, she relapses in some form in the midst of this. Is that correct?
That's correct. However, I mean, this is so complex. I actually supported the decision to get back on heroin because but it's a very long reasoning why, involving long versus short acting opiates. But bottom line is, the child was born substance exposed, which means that it was in the NICU for a long time, and I was like dealing with a CPS case from that situation.
Story just keeps getting better.
Yeah, I left. I had moved with my then wife to Washington State, and I returned back to Phoenix, Arizona, to make sure that this situation did not result in something more awful than I could have possibly imagined, which of course it did. But yeah, just to make sure that I was there for the fallout, so to speak. And it was during that time that I stumbled across Destin's work. I believe he called me up and asked me, "Hey, how's it going, man?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't think my life could get much worse." And he was like, "Well, I've got this men's group coming up," and I'm like, "Oh, really? All right, Destin. How do you suppose that this men's group could possibly aid me in my legal battle against the state of Arizona, or help me in this case? This is like some real issues, right?" And he didn't come at me directly with an answer, but just said, "Well, why don't you try it and just keep showing up?"
Just keep showing up.
And so I did. I showed up in this group of other men, and actually shared what was going on. And
I want to pause you for a moment. Like, I can imagine that in that state of such intense personal crisis, where it just seems like it can't get, as you said, can't get any worse than this. You've got the shit end of the stick, and who the fuck does this guy think that he is, and what's so special about him or his work or what have you that could possibly freaking help you? How'd you even show up?
Authentically, with like actually sharing what was going on with me with a lot of commitment and desire. I had absolutely no idea how engaging with this men's program was going to help, but I chose to trust the process. And over the course of,
I want to stop you for a second. Is it like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but was there a certain sense of like, well, fuck it, what do I have to lose?
Oh yeah,
like what else do I do?
Yeah, it's true. I had very little support during that time, like physically. I had to get like 2 jobs to manage things at the time. I had quit my job at that time, so I was living off a very small amount of savings, right? It felt like my life was basically like over. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to come back from this. And over the course of about 6 months, what it did was help me focus my will to focus on what I really wanted to create in my life from this place, as opposed to just spinning out in utter catastrophizing about what was going on, to feel as if I was not alone, which at the time when I entered, I felt very, very, very much alone. It felt like everybody in my life was like looking at me with these like accusatory eyes, right? Like, and very few people were in my corner. I didn't know how to talk to my family about it. They were not particularly supportive or understanding. The friends that I had were kind of, didn't know how to support either. So it was during that time, probably one of the, in addition to a couple really angelic community members, probably my largest source of support during that time, emotional support, as well as helping me to focus my will during that time, which was immensely valuable.
So there's so much more from here, but this seems like a good like pause point. And let's just take that in for a moment, because I kind of joked over our lunch that Michael has the best story. He's like, yeah, best. So just Bodhi, as you're ready, I'd Want to just hear a little bit about your backstory, so to speak?
Oh wow, where do I start? Yeah, what a mess. I do have a ton of things I mean, I got all the stories, the divorce, the cheating, the kid in the NICU, the ex-wife going through cancer, the cheating on my wife with her best friend, eventually leaving my wife for her best friend. There's so much there, but I think for me there was this sense of I can handle this through all that. Like, I was raised religious, so I had this like in the back of my mind, like God will never put me in a position that I can't handle. But I had no idea how to handle any of it, so I just kind of kept going, wondering, when is this going to get better? I guess, or maybe I guess I was just this tough person that could handle it. Like I really had no idea, but there was a shift that happened with Crystal and I.
His wife.
My wife, Crystal. My wife now, Crystal. Where even our codependency had gotten so entangled that once we started doing real work, and I guess real work would be like sovereign work.
What does that mean?
Like, so we got tangled up into like couples counseling, which is a really great way to become very codependent. You almost just learn about, at least the version we were in, we just learned about each other's traumas and patterns, and then we just catered to them instead of healing or doing the work ourselves to manage our wounds and manage our stories. But a shift happened.
I want to pause you for a moment because
for it.
like what you've just said already is like there's a lot there. There's a lot there. I mean, aside from first the intensity of your journey that you kind of glossed through,
Yeah. It's a long story. I mean, I can.
But the main things that you're making clear, even with your touching points, is that your life has not been idyllic. You've had some very intense challenges, as well as you've made some choices that have caused pain to both yourself and your loved ones. And then you, after cheating on your then wife with her best friend, you are now married to that best friend.
Yes.
Your relationship on one hand was felt like a big step up from your previous marriage, but kind of quickly went into this codependency type of a relationship, where particularly through you started doing couples counseling work together, which you're speaking of from kind of the negative impact that work had on you, where you came to understand the traumas that each of you held and learned how to tiptoe around each other's traumas.
Exactly.
Which just furthered this feeling of codependency and ultimately led you to this, what you call sovereignty work, where it ceased being about, okay, you as my partner, it's your job to never do anything that triggers my trauma.
Yeah.
And instead, sorry about that. Instead became more of what is my internal work to do so that whatever comes up, whatever happens, I can navigate and don't make you responsible for what is coming up inside of me.
Exactly.
Okay. Please continue while I make sure we don't have any more notifications going off.
Yeah, so that seems to be what's alive for me right now is that process that we went through, and that was a big part of the Evolved Masculine processes that you and I went through. I mean, really, it was a pivot that allowed me to see something that Crystal was already engaging in as far as our codependency was involved.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there again. That from what I recall, she started diving into her work and women's work first.
Yes.
And she was blossoming, like opening up in all these new ways, including connecting to her sensuality and her sexuality in new ways, her feminine energy in new ways, and was just in this like, I'm a goddess kind of a mode. And
100%.
you started to feel left behind.
No, actually what happened is she cut me off.
Oh.
Remember, like she completely cut me off. She was not feeling that I was respecting her no, and in the process of that was like, hey bud, we're not engaging sexually again until you can respect my no and prove to me that you can respect my no, which was the biggest mind fuck for me, because all of my validation came from our sexual interactions. Like I was almost 100% validating through my sexual interactions with my wife. And when she said no to me, it was the biggest, I mean, like once I finally made it through that, it was only about 3 weeks, but
yeah, hold on. But this is from a, having your regular sexual experiences with your wife to fairly suddenly her saying, no more, you cannot touch my body until I feel like you fully respect my boundaries. And she's saying like she needs to feel that you respect her boundaries and that her yes and no really matters to you. And at the time particularly, you had no idea when you're going to be allowed to have sex with your wife again.
Yes.
And what did that bring up for you?
Oh my God, it was devastating. There was a big part too where I didn't realize that, we had been together for 11 years at this point, and she was regularly having sex with me just to please me and because I would push.
Did you understand that at the time?
No, I really didn't. And I just don't know that it was ever modeled for me, and to look at sex from the woman's perspective has been a big eye opener for me in the last year. I can think of a lot of times where I've acted very inappropriately without, like, I don't want to not take responsibility for it. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I really was naive to how inappropriate I was being.
Let's have a quick example.
Like, just not respecting no. So, like, when a woman says no, I don't want to have sex with you, that doesn't mean ask again.
So let's keep it to your experience. So
okay, so like that was me, right? Like I was totally the guy that would just ask again and just ask again.
How about now?
Yeah, how about now? And just ask again, and then okay, well maybe just a hand job, or maybe a blow job, or whatever. Like that. Just that constant push to where
until she basically feels worn down or acquiesced. It's just easier to do it than to deal with the badgering.
100%, yeah.
Or to deal with his upset. And let's just fucking do it.
Yeah, and then I carry an abandonment wound that I have come to terms with, and I feel like I navigate very well today, but it is still a part of me. And back then I had no idea how to navigate it. So the rejection was a huge trigger for my abandonment wound, which would send me on a spiral of just like a fuck you to her. So the manipulation was there. I was like, I wasn't clear about it, but if you look back, and it was just like, in a sense, like non-consensual sex was happening frequently, and it wasn't physically non-consensual, but she was not emotionally consensual to what was happening.
Yeah, at the same time, there's a certain way in which not only were you violating her boundaries, she was violating her own boundaries.
Yes, and that was a lot of the healing that was taking place when she when she cut me off, which was one of the biggest things she's ever given me, looking back on it.
Gifts.
But one of the biggest gifts she's ever given me. But
at the moment, didn't feel that way.
No, it was also in the moment was the worst possible thing that could have ever happened to me.
That sounds like a good stopping point. Thank you so much, Bodhi. And one, remember to keep this in close. And after this, please interrupt each other. Let's chime in. But Joel, please.
First of all, Bodhi, what you said there resonated so much with me in so many aspects, especially the abandonment wound. I have that too, and I went through a lot of that too. But that's not where I want to go right now. There are so many directions this can take, but I'm going to go with the losing myself direction. I started off as a very independent guy when I was young. I thought I was going to be this lone ranger leading my life. I thought I was going to be all by myself, doing all the things I want to do and build my personal empire of everything. And then suddenly I saw myself married and with kids at a very young age. I had my first kid when I was 24 years old. I was already living with my wife for 2 years. And then we had other kids after that. I have 4 kids. I love them all. But at some point during the relationship, I started feeling that, well, I didn't feel that because I didn't know that's what was happening, but I was losing myself. I was losing my identity. I was losing joy to live, because I think being in that role of with so many people in the house and providing and being so responsible about it, which I always was, also because I have a father wound. I have a father that wasn't present, and I wanted to be the exact opposite of that dad. I wanted to be present for my kids. I wanted to provide. I wanted to be always there. And in this journey, I feel I ended up losing myself. And how did I find that out? What was the consequence of that in my life? 2 things. One of them was just a lack of joy. I started life just became sad and boring because I didn't know who I was anymore. There was no joy inside my house because I wasn't inside the house. I didn't put myself inside the house. I remember going to therapy once, and the therapist told me, you have to put more of yourself inside the house.
What do you mean by that?
Like every little thing, from the furniture in the house, from the decoration, I used to feel guilty, for example, to take some time for myself, to just ask my wife, "Oh, I want to go have some coffee by myself." That would make me feel guilty. Any time that I expressed my desire to do something that wasn't connected with the family, it made me feel that I was doing something wrong. That was one of the consequences. Now, the other one was that how to solve this problem. I started leading a double life because I felt that there was no room for me in the house, even though I wanted to be there because I wanted to be the opposite of my dad. So I wanted to be present. I wanted to be always, always, always there. But I started developing a double life. I agree with my wife that I could go out anytime I felt like it by myself. So that was the one thing I was able to get, was this freedom to go out with friends whenever I felt like it. And in this going out with friends, I started developing this double life, as in seeing other girls. I started seeing other girls, and I wouldn't say I had a drug problem, but I started taking a lot of drugs. Like it was,
It wasn't a problem.
it wasn't a problem because I never had to go to recovery, and I think I'm doing fine now. But for me, it was so important to have this escape, which was alcohol and other types of drugs. It was very important for me, and that's when I felt free. When I was outside the house, that's when I felt free. At the same time, I wasn't ready to try. I wasn't ready to, I don't know, to leave my family. I wasn't ready because I didn't want to, because I loved them. Why would I leave my wife if I love her? If I love those kids. So I just didn't know how to reach that balance of being myself healthily inside the house. So I wanted to be out of the house on the weekends when I could, and just lead this crazy, extreme, free life outside of the house. So there was this huge gap between these 2 personas that I was being, the perfect dad, the perfect husband, and the crazy cheating husband, druggie out there. And at some point in my life, that gap wasn't working. I needed to bridge that. I needed to. It was as if I had like my shadow and my light, and I just had to bring those two together. I've always been I've always been in the personal development arena. I've read lots of books. I've always been in the personal development arena. I've read lots of books, but something was missing to make it happen in real life, to help me bridge that gap.
To integrate these two parts of you and feel more like whole and complete, like you are congruent, Joao, wherever you are.
Yes, there was a lot of judgment, me to myself, a lot of judgment. And I had to, it was a journey. It ended up turning into a journey of self-love and a journey of self-acceptance and a journey of balance. And as I started loving myself more, I started feeling more balanced and less the need for the extremes, and started integrating. See, how can I bring that aspect of the crazy João into the healthy João? And how can I bring the healthy family man João into the crazy João, and just come up with a more balanced, a more balanced, halfway, like in the middle. So, and I knew my transformation would be somewhere with masculinity, with sexuality, because I believe that was my deeper wound, was with my father. And sexuality was always a very, very big part of my life. I've always been a sex explorer myself. That's why also I resonated with the work of Destin Garrick. I've always been someone who explored sexuality a lot. It was always something very big for me.
And at the same time, it seemed like you're seeking a way to feel like your sexuality was being both more fully expressed, while at the same time just coming from a healthier place within you and integrated more into the whole of your life, instead of compartmentalized over here as something that Evo Joao does.
Exactly. It was like removing the shame. There was a lot of shame in the sexuality too. So I left the sexual part of it, not all of it, but some of it, to Evo João. I mean, the family João was also having a lot of sex with his wife at home. But the Evo João was experimenting, and
you've taken on Evo Joao, okay.
So it was a way of removing the shame from all the sexuality. And there is something else. Sexuality for me, sex for me, is very grounding and meditative. So I have these two this crazy João and the healthy João, and it's all like too much in my head, like the family João trying to be different from his dad, thinking about how to be a better parent, and then the crazy João that would just get high and do all kinds of crazy shit. What did the sex do to me? The sex brings me down to earth. It keeps me embodied. It's like a meditation, So I knew since I was at a very young age that sexuality was my area of growth, is where I would find myself.
Great. That's a good pause point as well. Thank you. All right. So as you hear, there's I'm less inclined to share my story here, because again, you can find it in so many places, everywhere from my book, The Evolved Masculine: Be the Man the World Needs and the One She Craves, now available on Amazon, better bookstores everywhere. As well as countless podcast interviews that you find of mine. So we're going to primarily just really draw out from each of you. I also ask you, like, let's see how we can bring this more into our conversation with each other and touch in here, versus all being focused here and feeling more disconnected from one another. So hey, like within this as well, like ask your questions of each other. You're hearing each other's stories mostly for the first time now as well.
I want to ask Bodhi a question. So I dealt with the abandonment issue too a lot, and I've also it was very hard for me to take rejection from my wife when she didn't want to have sex. Mm-hmm. I did do the ask again thing too, or the compromise, negotiate, right? How about this or that? And then what I want to ask you is, at which point when and what was the breakthrough that made you start to respect that more, and to just not let that hurt you so bad? How did you to deal with the abandonment wound that you have, and just listen to that no and be okay with it?
That's a good question. I would say the learning to love myself and hold myself was the outcome, but the practice for me was in the mirror.
Mirror.
Yeah, with the mirror, like the dialogue in the mirror was Bodhi, I fucking love you. Bodhi, I love you.
So this came out during the kind of day-long intensive that we did together,
Yeah.
right? That you already had experience with mirror work practices,
I
like
did.
being basically standing in front of a mirror and making contact with the self through the
Yeah.
mirror, and kind of creating some sort of dialogue, communication with oneself in that way.
Yeah.
But then, I have a very particular way of leading mirror work that you seem to grasp onto very easily because of your previous experiences.
Yeah.
And that's where you really like found in there, as you went through like the evolved masculine archetype guided visualization, the power phrase, if I remember correctly, please correct me if I don't, that your evolved masculine self kind of reflected back to you was something.
It evolved into I deserve this.
Yes, but at that
but
day,
in the beginning, it was I approve of you. It was me telling myself I approve of you, and then there was, God, I'm trying to remember the phrase.
Let's
there
start
was
there.
a good phrase.
Why was that important to you? Why was it important to you for you to be like look in the mirror and say, "I approve of you"?
It was the validation. You know, I was validating from outside of myself. So the mirror work is where I shifted that validation, and actually that was one of my phrases also, was I self-validate or something along those lines.
Yeah, so this is a big deal that I find with a lot of people and a lot of men here, that there is this constant seeking of validation from outside of self. And again, like in our social media world, I mean, what do you think all these fucking likes and
Totally.
and such are? It's like, yes, world, validate me, tell me that I'm good enough, that my life matters.
So I'm going to pop in here if it's all right.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've noticed about each of our stories is that there could be an external observer out there who listens to each of us and says, "Oh my God, these guys are assholes," right? Like, what the hell do they think they're doing, talking about all this horrible, fucked up shit they did? These men need to be punished. These are bad men, right? And yet we're here, like, all together, leading a roundtable discussion of sorts on the evolved masculines. So my curiosity is, how did each of you overcome that negative self-image to be able to see yourself as a good man or something like that, after, because for me, I was internalizing all of this horrible self-concept that was reflected back to me from others. I'm wondering what each of your journeys was surrounding claiming your goodness, and you began to speak to that.
Yeah, definitely. The mirror was a huge part. There was a few medicine journeys that were profound, and in those processes I gave myself permission to show up in public as this person.
As what person?
As this person that deserves to everything. I mean, I really went extreme there for a couple of weeks, where I was just, everything was about me. Everybody was in service to me. Every attractive person that walked by did that for me. It was like I really needed to live that for a couple of weeks. I remember being at a concert and looking out at what looked like 50, 60,000 people, and just putting my arms up and visualizing that they're cheering for me. That was a big part of that self-love that I needed. and that's where the I deserve this came from, was that
Mhm.
night. Like in that moment, I was like, I fucking deserve all of this.
Well,
Yeah.
if I understand, if I'm reading this correctly,
Mhm.
there was this sense prior that perhaps because of these missteps or mistakes or actions of the past, etc., there was carrying around a shame, a self judgment, and what you felt on some level that you deserved instead, perhaps. N- might be as much as punishment, or at least like not the good things of life.
So I don't have a memory before last year where I felt like I was ever capable of being first place or being the most popular or being like, I always ranked myself less than most other people. Like I don't remember ever not feeling that way. I was a very successful off-road racer. I have a ton of second places.
Mm.
I got second in points for the season I raced. Like,
Mhm.
and I killed it.
Mhm.
But like my mindset would not allow for a first place, and I never remember thinking to myself, I'm going to win this fucking race. I always remember thinking, oh, I'm going to finish this and look good doing it and kind of be there. But I never was not once was I standing in my power going, I'm going to fucking win,
Mhm.
and that was a huge shift for me around the work you and I did. I want to say that was probably one of the biggest shifts for me.
Mm. Mm.
Because now I fucking win at everything I do.
Wow. All I do is win.
João.
What was the question again? I think I was thinking the same thing when you asked that, Michael.
I think his question was, you're really just an asshole. Who the fuck do you think you are?
Yeah, and that's how I felt for a long time. There is a lot of shame. It's also for me has been a journey of clearing shame, but at the same time, I knew I wasn't an asshole because I was being evil João in a very contained, controlled space. I never hurt anyone, and at home, I was being a great dad, a great husband. I was mostly harming myself. So
not everyone from the outside is certainly going to look at this way. How does is your wife aware at this point about evil Joao's past existence?
Yeah, she's very aware. She's very aware, and part of my healing has to do with how much she believes in me. That was, and it's not only validation; it's more than validation. It's just a deep love and belief.
So, does she feel harmed or wronged by your previous actions?
Yes, she does. We've had several talks about this, and there is a wound, and she feels yes, that she was harmed. But she's a special woman. I can't speak for herself, but sometimes it's, even for me, it's mind blowing, her emotional healing capacity. I can't speak for herself again, so I mean, it'd be great if she was here to talk about this.
I suppose the reason why they're bringing up is because you're saying, well, you weren't hurting anybody, and it sounds like
I was emotionally, I was hurting her. I think I meant like physically. I wasn't killing anybody or anything, but yeah, I did hurt her. Definitely, I definitely hurt her a lot. But there has been a lot of healing around this, and she has been a major part of that healing. We're still together. We've been together for 23 years. We are the closest we have ever been. We've always been very, very close, but we're the closest we have ever been right now. And it seems that I've been doing a good job of integrating my shadow and expressing it in healthier ways.
So the shadow being the parts of yourself that maybe previously you didn't want to generally admit to, you felt shame around, you otherwise like pushed down.
But there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm a work in progress. I haven't even changed my name yet. But I'm a work in and that's still on the table. I just need to find something that feels right.
Not a necessity, but we can also get into the why so many people do find it valuable in this whole change process. But for now, Michael, what about your answer to you just seem like an asshole?
Well, largely my response to that would be, yeah, I am an asshole. And I have been an asshole. And, frankly, if you can't find any way in which you've been an asshole or that, and all you want to do is perceive me, and all you want to do is perceive me as one, then we don't really have much to talk about, right? Because that's something that I had to recognize, is that the entire perception of an individual who is perfect, who has always been perfect, who never fucks up, who never does anything that they have to learn from, is completely a facade, right? And the best that I can do is be fully engaged in my own growth process, be as transparent as possible, first with myself, and then, as it's safe, with the other people in my life, right?
So this, to me, is what the evolved masculine has always been about. I mean, this is why I've taken on the unalome as a symbol of the evolved masculine, this Thai Buddhist symbol. In fact, I think it's up there on the video. It represents the winding path. It represents how life is not this straight line. It represents how we're constantly going, like, quote unquote, like, off path, and yet it ultimately is all part of the path. And to me, like, when I get asked about, particularly by women, about like what makes an evolved masculine man, or how do you know if you have a man like that, like, my answer really comes down to what is his commitment to introspection and growth. Who you have been in the past, mistakes that you've made, what has gotten you to this point, none of that matters that much to me. It's more of, what is your willingness? What is your willingness to look within? What is your willingness to do what is necessary? What is your willingness to repair past harms? And what is your willingness to do better? And that is what I see in each of the men here, myself included, maybe first and foremost. I don't know.
That journey has definitely gained a lot of momentum in my life in the past 3 years. The journey of just becoming a better person, a better man, more conscious. Yeah, it has definitely gained a lot of momentum. And
How has that looked? What do you mean by it having gotten more momentum?
I think I kind of hit a sweet spot of what I'm supposed to be doing internally. For me, it's always been internal. The whole journey has always been very, very internal. And we read all these books and we go to all these workshops, and it doesn't mean we're actually changing anything. It's not necessarily transformational if you don't know how to make a transformation inside yourself. And I think in the past couple of years, those things have really become transformational for me, because I hit a sweet spot, as in, I think I'm starting to learn how to love myself. I'm starting to learn how to integrate those things. And I can see actual change, not only in how I feel, in terms of, I think, for example, I was mildly depressed for most of my life. I was, this lingering depression that wouldn't go away. I don't feel that anymore.
When you were in it, did you know that that's what you were in?
No, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was something physical. I was just sad, and I was living the quiet desperation life of Thoreau. Once in a while I would have a breakdown, like on the kitchen counter. I would start crying or something. I had no idea why. I'm like, I'm doing everything so right. Like, I'm here with my family. I'm taking care of my kids. Why am I so sad? I wouldn't know. So yeah, and I was reading all these books, but nothing was changing. And then, yeah, so I didn't know what was going on. But then when I started coming out of it, then I realized there was something very wrong, and that I finally found like a path, a way that I finally identified a way of working with myself internally that started healing me. And it has to do with self-love, has to do with overcoming shame. Yeah, and showing up. Yes, definitely showing up. Definitely being part of a group and being vulnerable, and truly showing up, even if I feel it doesn't feel right, it feels weird, it feels, even being here, I'm camera shy. So even being here, it's very edgy, but I know what's going to come out of it is good. So that's why I keep doing it.
You don't seem very camera shy to me.
I am. I fidget a lot. Like, yeah.
That we might have noticed. So I get the next big question for you. We've mentioned the name change for a couple of the men here, and you've been bringing it most of all since you haven't, and I did as well. Yeah, I was. Destin is a chosen name that I've been living in for 15 years now. And I want to speak to that just briefly, that the reason why many people find it valuable when they're doing this, I don't know, particularly our evolved masculine process of transformation, to do a name change is as part of that kind of total shift in self-identity. Our names are really powerful. And at the same time, our name from birth often has a lot of emotional baggage. We have a lot attached to it. And every time we hear our names, every time we speak our names, it can tie us to this entire lineage history of emotions that we have tied up in that name. And so sometimes, particularly with the evolved masculine archetype, what we do is initially we create a vision of the man that you want to be in the world and put him in the third person, like externalize this vision of him, in part because it can sidestep the ego, sidestep the part of you that's like, oh, well, I can't do that. I could never be that. And it's like, well, you don't have to be like he, this ideal vision of self, your evolved masculine self. Who would he be? And he could be anything. I mean, he's a figment of your fucking imagination. So go wild. And that can just create a certain freedom in people to allow themselves to dream and envision larger than they otherwise would have. And so doing, aside from just like a he or, my evolved masculine self, whatever, so a lot of folks find it helpful to give them a name. And sometimes they just create the name. Sometimes it's a name that's you've always carried with you in some way. Sometimes it's a name you've always like wished you had, or just feel some affinity to. Sometimes it comes from something outside of yourself. Or sometimes the name has a translation or a meaning to it that exhibits like that which you're striving for. And then as you do this change process and you're intentionally stepping into being him, as you own that name, as you say, like, I am Destin Garrick, I am Bodhi, I am Michael Author, I am wherever you're going. Every time you introduce yourself as such, every time you I am it, every time somebody else calls you by that name, it's this reminder to yourself that this is who you are now. Why is this who you are now? Because you fucking decided that is who you're going to be now. You have chosen it. You are committed to it. You are making it so. Why Michael Author?
Well, around that time that I spoke about earlier, I realized I would ask myself, how in the hell did I get here? And I realized that the majority of my life, I had been operating from the scripts that other people had laid down for me in life, right? Not actually according to the story that I wanted to tell about myself, which put me in a place of deep self-compromise. So I decided in that moment to change my name to Author, to remind myself that I was the only one who got to tell the story of my life, right?
So you are the author of your life.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it sounds so banal, right? When you say it like that, because it's a trope and it's incredibly important. It cannot be overstated. And I believe that this shift is a shift that almost everybody who takes the reins of their own life needs to make, right? Like to really look at the stories that they're telling themselves about who they are, who they've been, and who they are becoming.
That's great. And I think it suits you perfectly also because you're an excellent writer.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another thing. I did actually get my MFA in creative writing and taught English and stuff like that. So it's also that.
And look at how creative you are with the authoring of your life.
Oh God. Yeah. Well, I'm actually probably trying to be less creative at this point.
I understand. Bodhi, what about how did Bodhi come to be?
So I've always liked the name Bodhi, and it definitely originates from Point Break. When I was a kid, that was I just always thought that was the coolest character, and the name resonated with me. But you and I had a conversation, and you encouraged me to get a tattoo, and I was
I doubt it came from me. I believe I picked up on something you were saying, and
Totally.
then I grabbed it.
Totally. Our conversation was
You must get a tattoo
it wasn't that at all, but it was like, do something
of the Unalome. Be one of our cult.
One of us. You can be one of us too.
I guess the encouragement was a placeholder in my life. I got my ears pierced first, and there was a few people I had been spending a lot of time with that had changed their names, and we started to have conversations around it, and you and I were one of those conversations, and I started to dream about it, and then everybody's dog's name is Bodhi. I don't know if you noticed that. So there was like there was a lot of resistance for me around that, because I don't want to be named after the dog, right? Like, but I started having these dreams, and then my wife and I had we hadn't quite gotten to the sexual cutoff, or maybe this was right after we started having sex again, but we were dabbling in sex magic, right? And like I dropped into this very
Hold on. And what is sex magic?
A sex magic is, to me, it's intentional. It's intentional sex. So it's sex with an intention.
I'll give a brief definition. If you use it differently, please intervene. But sort of like taking the notions of how our thoughts have an influence on reality, and what's being created in the world, and what's being manifested, so to speak, and what we're attracting in. It's and that sex and sexual energy is incredibly powerful energy, and powerful creative energy, powerful life force energy. So by holding an intention, preferably both people or more people involved in the sex together, a shared intention, a shared idea, a shared vision, and holding your minds together while you're having sex with one another, and particularly as one or both of you are peaking into orgasm, it's like it's putting that potent energy into that idea, that intention, as it makes its way into the universe. Or if you want to make it a little bit more grounded in those moments of orgasmic, in sex, in heightened arousal states, particularly at points of orgasm, the separation between the conscious and unconscious mind thins. So your unconscious mind becomes so much more suggestible, so to speak. So that by holding that intention together in like something that you're actively, consciously wanting versus just whatever's happening in the moment, you're planting a seed into your unconscious part of your mind that then your unconscious mind can continue to work with in the background, even when your conscious mind is not thinking about it.
Yeah, that spot on.
Yeah, not so brief, but go on.
Okay, so we had just started dabbling in this. This is something we do pretty regularly now, but generally every time we have sex, I would call it magic. But I also had this desire to have a spirit animal weeks prior, and it was a bear, and so I brought this bear into this sex magic ritual that my wife and I were having.
So you and your wife had sex with a bear? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was the bear, totally, yeah. But in the process of that, like I blasted off, right? Like I don't know how to explain where I went, but I do leave my body occasionally, and this was one of those cases. And I'm looking at myself having sex with my wife from above, and visualizing myself as this bear, and in the process of that, I transformed into a Bodhi tree, shading us while we were having this ritualistic sexual experience. And that was like one of the key moments where I was like, okay, I really can't ignore this anymore. Like as much resistance as I had to the name Bodhi, I was like, okay, fuck,
So
can't deny that experience.
some people view, like, whether you view that as like a message from the universe trying to really, like, you're gonna get this, or whether you view it as the deeper unconscious part of your mind just continuously putting this in front of you, and that it's already accepted something that your conscious mind was just fighting against until
exactly
you came into alignment.
And it could be both of those things completely. Yeah. Or so that was the big pivotal moment, where I just was like, okay. And from then my wife had started calling me Bodhi, and then
First of all, it's great that she was on your team and cooperative in that way.
Totally.
Sometimes when people want to make that type of change, people in their lives or the significant other, it's resistant to it. It's like, no, you've been my mark for as far back. I fell in love with this person. Who is this? But often along with that, so also like an attachment of fear of like, well, who would you be? Who are you becoming? And where am I in all that?
Yeah, and there's definitely, we've had those conversations. She did accept the name really quickly, but definitely as you show up differently.
Yeah, my family hates my name. They do not accept it particularly well.
Do they, Michael? Is it because you've dropped your family name?
I think they're just stuck on the real name thing. That's not your real name. It's not the name that we gave you as a child, right? There's this thing that it's just not something that you do, is change your name.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of shoulds there. And I've had numerous conversations about it, like, about like respecting choice and whatnot. But at this point, I need to be self-approved, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't just expect that my family will immediately love it or accept it. It needs to be something that I do for me.
For myself, I've never asked my family to call me Destin. I have cousins who do, and like I even honestly, that always feels a little bit weird to me because there's a way in which I associate my birth name with my family, and it kind of creates this other kind of intimacy. I don't. It really is the only time I relate to it. In many ways, Greg, my birth name, which is my preference. I prefer birth name over like real name because at this point, Destin is my real name. Greg ends up feeling like it's like an echo of something old. It feel, if anything, it feels like that's the mask I'm putting on. when I'm around my family. This old younger part of me there. But I don't know, personally, I never wanted to maybe I never wanted to fight, and I was concerned that it would be, or maybe the fact that we live thousands of miles away just allowed me to feel like, okay, like, I know who I am over here, and you want to hold me to this old version of me that you knew me as a boy. That's okay. I'm both self-validated, and I've built community around myself that reflects back to me in conjunction, like in relation to the self-image that I have, so I don't need it supported over here.
There's something like what you shared reminded me that as Bodhi came out into the world, and I was introducing myself as Bodhi, and I was sharing my name change with people, it definitely gave me, I was selective about who I did it with at first, because it was very much the people who knew me as Bodhi. Also, I would show up for them as this evolved masculine, this idea that I had created, this person that I wanted to be, this person I was giving myself permission to be.
Well stated right there.
Yeah, and it took me time. I was living in a community house for a lot of this time, and those people were very supportive. And for weeks they were the only ones I told. And then I started to share with longtime friends, and it wasn't received really well at first. Like I actually, it was like, I'm thinking about changing my name to this, and they were like, oh, that's stupid. And they now, all of those guys call me Bodhi, but it took me time it wasn't until probably a month ago did I really start leaning into my hometown. I grew up in Joshua Tree, which is back in the 80s and 90s was really small. Like it's pretty small now, but it was very small. And so I have, everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody's business. And so to show up, and I just had this experience a few weeks ago where one of my longtime friends, she told me, she said, I'm not going to call you, because I've changed my name on social, so like people have seen it. But she was like, I'm not going to call you Bodhi unless you ask me to. And my response was, well, then I'm asking you to. And it, like, to stand in that and know me with my old family, it was a real powerful moment for me. To just be like, I'm showing up as Bodhi for all of these people now. Like, I'm showing up for everyone.
So there's a way in which you've held your identity of who you were as Mark. Mm-hmm. And again, that there came to be a very intentional process. It's, I'm honored to have supported of creating a new vision of self that you came to identify with, of you used the phrase that you allowed yourself to be this kind of evolved masculine version of yourself, mm-hmm. letting go of that which tethered you to old ideas of who you were, and that may have been reinforced by people who knew you back in the day. And where, this is something that can often happen, is that the people in our lives can unconsciously be part of holding us back, because they have this idea. And it's not just you likely do that. I like do this. We do this to the people in our lives unconsciously quite a bit, where we hold them to old ideas of who we think that they are based on past experiences, whereas we're constantly growing. We have a friend who's getting married this weekend, and at his bachelor party, we were I said to him that the biggest mistake I think that we can make is thinking that I already know her. Like my wife, like I know her now. And I say it's the biggest mistake because my wife is constantly changing. She's constantly growing and evolving. She's becoming more and more. And that's a fucking incredible thing. And like, when I think that I already know her, I think I already understand everything, that's like, where's that space to really know newly who this woman is in front of me? That's, that we can do this to one another, and then it can be these invisible chains that we feel around ourselves, as we're constantly having reflected back to us these notions of self that maybe don't even really feel like they fit anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like that's what you did, and that you were very smart about it. Like, initially doing, like, having new community around you who was very supportive and embracing. I mean, this is why I'm forming the Evolved Masculine Brotherhood, so we can have a space where, like, we're all your fucking cheerleaders. We're all your fucking cheerleaders. You're focused on growth and change. Like, fuck yeah, do it, go, yes, you can do it. Because too often that's not what we have around us. And then as you had this new, like, center of gravity of community around you who were in support of Bodhi and who you were stepping into, then it became safe for you. You've had to go to other people in your life who you'd known longer, who may not understand. And while initially you felt pushback, what can too often happen, this can happen even when people go to like a Tony Robbins weekend or some sort of transformational seminar or whatever. They have this big, open, expansive experience, and then they go back home, and the people that around them don't understand it, and they try to pull them back to what they do know and do understand in order to feel a sense of like safety and comfort. Again, this is usually unconscious, but this happens all the time. And two things can happen. You can allow it to pull you back into what was before, and that happens all the time. If, however, you're able to maintain the fucking power center, you maintain that this new center of gravity here, which helps a lot if you have others around you who can help hold you there. Usually, the other people who are in resistance, who first tried like drawing you back down, they adjust.
Well,
They adjust.
sometimes not just adjust. They're like, how did you do what you did? What's going on with you? And then they get
How do I get some?
serious. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily initially come off that way. Sometimes it can just be resistance and fear.
Yeah, and even on top of that, there was a portion of time where I was living two different lives. Not necessarily intentionally, but I would show up as Mark and in different instances with different people and fall right back into old patterns and then start to it became a practice for me to integrate Mark and Bodhi, because having them separate for a time was powerful, but it wasn't.
This is really worth going into, because I remember when this was happening for you. First, it would and when it happened for me, for that matter, where first the stepping into Bodhi was in many ways sort of like a denying of Mark.
Totally.
And then what was the problem that started to arise from that?
Well, it would just, as I became aware of holding myself and validating from the inside and just managing my wounds, it might be an easy way to say that, I would see the transition, and Mark would almost come out. Like, say my cup got too full emotionally and I overflowed, which for me was usually in anger. I would start to be like, oh, there's Mark. Like I was almost shaming Mark, or I was shaming Mark. Like, and I intentionally had to connect those two back together at some point.
And how did you do that?
I just started to love Mark. I wish I could tell you the formula for that, because I think I tried a lot of different things, and they probably all helped a little bit along the way. But really, all it was just realizing that Mark is the little boy inside of me, and loving that he did what he knew how to do to get to 40 years old. And Bodhi came along and said, okay, it's my turn.
So is this work teaching us to have multiple personalities?
That's very inspiring.
Totally.
It was just a question. I'm not attached to any particular answer.
I want to talk about the name thing too. If it's
but I feel like since he just raised this thing, you should at least give your own answer to that, Mr. Author.
Well, I largely think that it's working with the power of a persona, right? Mm-hmm. So is any one persona who you are? No, right? It's an aspect of self.
However, so, for example, like who you are on this bed here is different than who you are when you're in bed with a lover, which is different from who you are when you get on the phone with a parent of yours, or you're with your child or a spouse,
or when you get angry, boss. Right? Or when you feel depressed or sad, or any time that you inhabit a different aspect of self, right? So this is about
we are multifaceted beings.
Multifaceted. So this is about intentionally crafting an aspect of self, and then more and more beginning to live as that, right? So it's like creating a new fractal, part of the self that does not invalidate in any way any of those other parts.
It was like there's so much of our sense of self that was unconsciously created when we were small children and didn't have the level of awareness that you have today. And that we were just at the whim of all these forces around us that were feeding us all sorts of stories and belief systems, and some of which we accepted blindly, some of which we rejected relatively blindly as well. And in many ways, this is just an opportunity to become the author again, instead of just being at the whim of these external unconscious forces, to be like, okay, well, with who I am today, with what I know today, with what I have, the resources I have available today, who do I intentionally want to be? How do I intentionally want to be showing up?
Right. And there's some people who take a look at those who are doing this work and they're like, oh, they're hippies, or they're this or they're that. And what I really like to say is, like, you don't need to be anything like me. You don't need to be anything like Bodhi. You don't need to be anything like Destin.
I mean, I am a hippie.
Yeah.
But I'm not just a hippie.
Right. But it's like, this is actually just a process of, in my estimation, of fully stepping in to adulthood. Right? It's like being
Sure.
who you choose to be, not who you think you should be. Right? That is essentially what I view this process of consciously creating your evolved masculine self as. I think every human being needs to go through it. But it's unique for men as it is for women, right? There are different aspects of it that are important to us, but ultimately it's a process every human being at some point in their lives need to go through.
Does make
I highly recommend it anyway.
I mean, you cannot, but ultimately I would consider it just perpetuating suffering.
João.
What you said, it does hit home, Michael. The whole thing of it's just like becoming an adult and maturity. That's how I feel right now, as in, well, the fact that I'm becoming who I am. Anyways, what I want to say, talk about the name, the struggle I have with changing the name is that, well, first of all, I have a Brazilian name. Okay, my name is João. I'm Brazilian. It's a very exquisite name in English, but very not exquisite in Portuguese. It's like the most common name there is. And so for practical reasons, it does make sense for me to change my name because it makes it easier for people to pronounce and everything. But I do feel when Bodhi talks about giving permission to be Bodhi, I feel that I haven't given permission for myself to be João. I feel like João has a lot to offer out there, and I have never given permission for João to be fully himself. So I have a hard time letting João go because I feel João haven't had a chance yet to fully manifest itself. But on the same time, when you talked about loving Mark and using this love as the integration tool, yes, I now it also hit home to me. Be like, yes, I could step into another name, another persona, identity, and love João for everything that he's brought to me throughout my life. That might be a way of
I'm anti-dogmatic. I say this all the time. I have found processes that are very powerful. They're very fucking powerful, and I have ways that I've learned to teach them. And ultimately, I'm a big believer in you find the way that works for you. You know, it can really be helpful to start with this model, but then I love coloring outside the lines, so I encourage you to do so as well. Whether you choose to step into a new name or not, that's ultimately your choice. We've been expressing the power that's held for each of us. Some people have a lot of resistance to it. All right, that's fine. Sometimes that resistance is valid. Sometimes it's something for you to lean into. For some people, it is a total name change, like from Mark to Bodhi, from Greg to Destin. I changed first and last name. Michael just changed his last name. He held on to his first name. Some people go and just take a different form of their name. Like, for example, I said Greg, but you know what? As a boy, I was always called Gregory. You know, as I started to become like a teenager, I was like, no, I am Greg. You know, that itself is the same fucking thing. It's the same thing. Other people like shift to to using their middle name. Some people it's some sort of like nickname. Loads of people today like use a particular username, whether on social media or in their favorite game. There are so many ways in which people play with this all the fucking time. This is just a particular way of being intentional around it that I found very powerful.
I also enjoy people struggling to pronounce my first name and watching them.
What's the squirm?
Joe Ao.
João.
I think I still don't do it right.
No, you guys do it well. Michael does it very well.
Joao?
Very good. Excellent.
Because it isn't so much like a Joao. It's
like
more like a
Zhu.
Zhu.
It's like-
Joao.
It's a
Zhao.
It's the j sound that doesn't exist in English, and the o that also doesn't exist.
How do you... Ow?
Oh.
Ow.
João.
Joao.
Yeah.
Joao.
You guys are doing great. See, I gotta keep this name. Maybe I'll change my last name, which means kingdom in English. Reino, kingdom.
You know, I mean, this is the thing. It isn't about it doesn't need to be about disowning. Like, I love the roots of my birth name. I don't actually like to speak about my birth name, like my full birth name, publicly as part of my intentional kind of keeping a separation between my public and private life. But my birth name, first, middle, last name, roughly translates to Divine Watcher of Man, which is pretty apropos. Given where my life path has led. Whereas Destin Garrick translates to either brave destiny or one whose destiny is to protect that which is good. Also kind of works for me. You know, like I'll take and own them. So, again, like I love names with our children, Inanna and Shinga, and the first and middle name. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but my wife and I were extremely intentional about both their names. Like, with my son, we spent months on that, like really clarifying and playing with different things and finding something that's just like, it's sort of like with my tattoo. When somebody asks me about my tattoo, I'm like, do you want the short answer or the long answer? There's so much embedded in this single design. There's all these different layers of depth, and we've done the same thing with each of our children's names, both first and middle. Like I can tell lengthy stories about Destin Garrick as well. Like, again, it's said, especially in his personal development worlds, that anything that starts with I am, it's a power statement. Yeah, it is a claiming of self. And so a name, every time you say, oh, I am Destin, I am whoever you are, like there's this consistent perpetuation of identity. Well, and that seems like something worth being intentional about. We spent a lot more time on name than I was expecting. So I guess I just want to do a little bit more about where you have landed. We get that we've all been assholes in the past.
Not me. No, I haven't.
We've all made mistakes, caused harm, been hurt. We all carry wounds and traumas in our pasts. And how does that... where's that compared to the man you are today? I may be connected to that of the man that you're committed to becoming, that you're still in the process of becoming. Whoever.
So, to answer that, who am I today? There's this attunement. Paul Selleck calls this an attunement, but it's...
I love that word. Use it all the time.
It's... I know who I am. I know what I am. I know how I serve. And I heard that for the first time 5 or 6 years ago, and I kept thinking, like, who am I? What am I? How do I serve? And I wanted to put labels to it, like I'm a low voltage contractor or whatever. I'm a TV installer. I used to do home theater, if you guys didn't know.
I was going to say, is Bodhi, are you a...
No, Bodhi has never hung a TV. Bodhi will never hang a TV.
I love that.
He's also never going to fill out a W-2. But anyway, that attunement to me is so different now. It's not, I know who I am. I am a. It's I know who I am. It's a statement of its own. I know what I am. I'm in integrity. I know what I am. I know how I serve. I serve main of late. It's been to create safe space for women. My wife being one of those women. And that's alive for me right now is to be that safe place. Plus, I love being told I feel safe around you by women. That's such a big deal to me. To be told that it's something I was so disconnected from for a lot of my life.
Yeah, that's a phrase that can be incredibly fulfilling or feel really good when you are in a place of sexual fulfillment. It can be a source of incredible pain if
Frustration.
you're living in a place of sexual frustration and all you hear is, "Oh, I feel safe with you." So
Totally.
When you're able to hold both of those poles, that to me is where is worth aiming towards.
Well, and I would add that the most powerful sexual experiences that I've had didn't come until after I realized how important it was for that safety to be available.
Whew, big statement there. Why do you think that is?
Well, the surrender. There's something about a woman surrendering, and there's something about me surrendering enough so that she can surrender.
What do you mean?
farther.
I just would like to break things down a bit more for our newer listeners. Like when you speak of surrender in this context, what do you mean?
So it can be a few things. It can be surrendering into pleasure, which might just be her dropping into a deeper, fuller, longer orgasm, or it can be her surrendering completely and looking at me and telling me, you can do whatever you want with my body.
How does that feel hearing that one? Thank you, Bodhi.
Where am I going, or where have I landed? Largely, where I've landed is having a knowledge of what I'm committed to as a human being in the world, right? So one of the things where I'm going, I would say, is building myself into more of a family person, family oriented individual. That's my next step. As far as where I've landed into kind of a mission, right? To broadcast the message that one's authentic desire is the blueprint not only for each individual on this planet to live a life that they really want to be living, but also for us all collectively to live in a world that we want to be living in. And that where people view that as not being the case, right? Like, oh, so all these people who their authentic desire is just to like get rich and this, that, and the other thing and abuse people, right? I believe that those things are based on fundamental distortions. And when you boil down to an individual's real desire, we all want relatively close to the same things for ourselves and for everyone else and the world. It's just that at some point in time, we stopped believing that it was possible. You'll notice if you ever talk to a kid, right? A kid wants world peace. Kid wants everyone to get along. Kid wants their parents to get along. They are naturally idealistic in that way, and they do not compromise with their desire. It's just when we learn what is possible versus not possible that we begin to stop believing in that childlike innocence of our desire. So that is kind of the place that I've landed.
Okay, Wow, so much wisdom going on around here. I just love being here. I love you guys. It's an honor to be here. And I'm going to answer looking at you because, yes, so because testing asked us to be more, I'm going to try that. I landed in integrity. That's where I landed because I lived out of integrity for so long. So I landed in this obsession with integrity, with honesty, with coming clean.
So you're behind the logo. So
Here we go.
A little bit, thank you.
The logo right here. Coming clean and yeah, just living with integrity. First of all, integrity with myself. So that requires getting to know yourself better and better, to know who you are, and then bringing everything to light. That made me a little bit suspicious of everything because I'm very suspicious of anything not honest. I try to live in full honesty, and everything that's in my life that I feel it's in the dark, it's not. There's I want to bring it to light. I want to, and I also have this need for everybody around me to be in full honest. Every time I sniff a little bit of dishonesty, it turns me off like immediately. So yeah, I've landed in integrity. And one very important part of my healing that I want to share here has to do with freedom. Freedom is a very important part of who I am. Emotional freedom. That's why I was leading that double life in the past. So I'm living in an open marriage. My wife and I, we opened the marriage, and this has been an extremely important part of my integration of all the Joãos. And we are very happy with it. We've been doing this open marriage for about 2 years now. It's more a hierarchical polyamory type of thing, meaning my wife is my main partner and we can all have other partners. And we have very clear boundaries, very clear arrangements. Everything has to be very clear and in integrity. And this is working out very good. Like this has been a very, very important part of my healing, is this emotional freedom that I have now in integrity. And yes, that's what I wanted to say.
So you went from your sexual romantic relationships with others being something that you were leading a double life around, something that you had needed to hide and sneak around and keep from your wife, etc., to it really facing it full on, coming clean with your wife,
Yes.
having all the difficult conversations, ultimately coming to a place where you're open, honest, and transparent with one another, where she also has this openness or freedom to explore other lovers or connections, while you are as well, and all it with the transparency with one another, open communication with one another. And then lastly, you spoke of it being what's known as hierarchical polyamory. Polyamory meaning many loves, a form of open relating, where the hierarchical meaning that your relationship with one another is held at the top. It is the most important to you both. Any other lovers is a step down from that.
Yes. So I went from unethical non-monogamy to ethical non-monogamy. And the unethical non-monogamy, the doing it in hiding, it was also affecting my sex life. Like I was always and the shame that I was trying to get rid of. I was actually building more and more shame. And during sex, I was having trouble. I don't like to use the word perform, but I was having trouble performing because it was always in hiding. It was always out of integrity. It was always fast. It was always in a weird place.
I like to call it non-consensual non-monogamy.
Here we go. Non-consensual.
Yeah, a lot of people do call it unethical, but it.
Oh, non-consensual. Yes. Non-consensual.
When
yes.
you're with your wife at the time, I assume that you presented as monogamous, right? For a while, right?
Yes. So yeah, the coming into integrity. I also, yes, not being in integrity. It was harming also my sexual development, which was something that was dear and near to my heart. So I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to have to go through the experience of having sex, not feeling present or worried about other things. So that was part of the healing. It was opening the relationship in it, and it felt great. And since I've talked so much about my wife, I just want to say hello to my girlfriend, whom I love very much. You know who you are.
We're gonna have to wrap things up. Biggest challenge with doing these lives is how folks like to be in the comments section.
Goofballs.
I can't read that. My eyesight's not gonna allow me to read that.
That's why I was leaning forward. So, first of all, thank you. Like, to be honest, I could be in this conversation with you all for hours more. Luckily I can, but y'all are gonna miss it. There's so much. There's so much more. Maybe we'll end up doing a part two at some point, or separately, or in different configurations. I have other folks in my from our whole evolved masculine community and world that I want to bring on here at points as well. But I just want to thank you for showing up for us all here today, and first and foremost for yourself and for the people in your life. The self work that you have each done is remarkable. You took a very difficult situation, and one that arguably you played a real role in creating, but you took a very very difficult situation and you turned it around significantly, which is not a given. In fact, loads of people don't ever do. They just spin further and further down.
Yeah. This year I've had a couple of friends either die or commit suicide, and having methods of transforming your life, even knowing that it's possible, is such a gift.
I was suicidal for many years, and this whole process has just helped me so much.
Thank you. For those who are watching, we've recently launched our Evolved Masculine Brotherhood. Right now, it's rooted in a Facebook community. You go to evolvedmasculine.com/brotherhood. This is a place where you can connect with other like-minded men who are resonate with this work, with this message, with becoming the best men that they know how to be, to help further hone their image, their vision of who that man is, and work within a community of men who are in total, unconditional mutual support of you moving in that direction and reflecting that back to you, while also learning about your sexuality and more of what's possible here as we learn to master our sexual energy and deepen our understanding of women and the feminine, and how to form healthier relating to her and with her, including the feminine within. So if that is something that you resonate with, which quite honestly, if you've made it this far, probably does, join us over at evolvedmasculine.com/brotherhood.
See y'all there.
And thank you. I'm really glad that you're finding value in this as well. It's really great having you in our brotherhood and be part of this community. There's always new levels that we can go to. See you next week on the Decoding Women podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.